كارين.
حضرتك اسمك صعب قوي يعني.
خالد. اكيد اكيد لا يعني. مفيش.
بص بقى على الكراسي.
بصيت في كل حته. حد حطه في شنطته بقى ولا ايه؟ انا حاسه ان احنا
Shit, would we need this for something like French? Huh?
yes,
Yes?
they're going to be French.
Okay.
نجمع الاول بعد كده نطلع.
Welcome, everyone. We are going to start. I know some of our speakers are still at the march, but I think in the interest of time, we can go ahead. So I would like to invite my panelists and the speakers for the first session to come up on the podium. So we have the representative of Commissioner Sako, representative of UNECA, Lucky Abeng, Dr. Mithika Mwenda, Senator Didier Molisho, Dr. Esterine Fatabong, and the representative from Botswana. So please take your seats on the podium. Also requesting our colleagues to move to the front so we occupy the seats up front. So we start right away with so let's move to the front as we wait for colleagues to join. I'm just checking with Botswana if you have a representative. So we'll start with a statement from Her Excellency Ambassador Josepha Sako, who is the Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy, and Sustainable Environment. And then we'll go with remarks from the UNECA, followed by a message from the youth, followed by a message from the civil society organization, the Pan-African Parliament, our implementing agency, AUDA NEPAD, and then the minister's address. So I'll now welcome our Director, Hassan Nyambe.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Allow me to recognize the presence of Her Excellency or Honorable Phil Dakereng. That's the Minister of Environment and Tourism of the Republic of Botswana. And in the same vein, also recognize the members of Parliament, Pan-African Parliament who are here, as well as other distinguished participants, including ambassadors, the representative of AUDA NEPAD, civil society organizations, the youth, and everybody present here. Right from the onset, we would want to express our gratitude to everybody who has made it to this event. We are aware that there are a couple of events that are ongoing here at the COP, and yet you felt that you need to give attention to your own continent, and of course, also that has been done by some of our partners who are present here. So basically, as the AU, we are actually committed to the issues of climate change for the mere fact that our people are actually struggling to be able to make ends meet as a result of the impact of climate change. And this has not spared any sector, and by this I mean climate change itself. And it's for that reason that as a continent we have got a directive to be able to speak with one voice and make sure that our interests are actually heard at international arenas such as this. And we have also put in place a couple of measures to be able to address climate change, one of them being the Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy, which was actually adopted this year. But in addition to that, some of you may be aware that we've got a couple of climate commissions, as well as other initiatives that are in place to be able to coordinate issues of adaptation on the continent. So basically the purpose of this event is to make sure that we are all able to come together and share knowledge and experiences with regard to the activities that we are carrying out to address climate change. And without much ado, allow me now to hand over to the moderator, who is going to invite the speakers or honorable speakers who are going to take us through the opening session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. Our next speaker is Dr. Mithika Mwenda from the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. He's going to deliver a message from the civil society organizations, and he will also have a okay, over to you, Dr. Mithika.
Thank you very much, Leah, the moderator, and the Honorable Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I will not do something because written. We have been here for the past week, and being in the midweek, I want to really commend the African Union for putting together this event as a reflection moment for us who are here and came here with a lot of hope for the African COP. And you'll agree with me that as days go, a week to the conclusion of the COP27, there is really nothing very significant which is likely to come out of this conference. First and foremost, when we were coming here as the civil society and the African people, we were united by a number of issues which we brought here. First and foremost, we have attended meetings at the African Group of Negotiators. We have been invited in Africa to meetings with the African Ministerial Conference on the Environment. We have attended meetings with the LDC's group in Africa. We have attended meetings, the 10th edition of the Conference on Climate Change and Development for Africa in Namibia, whose very key highlights were presented during the first Africa Day. Those are issues which united us. But in the first day, the agenda setting, we lost the first one which carried that, the recognition of Africa as the special needs and circumstances region. What does that mean? It means all what that agenda carried then was forgotten. And those are the challenges which we normally have here. And it wasn't issues again. When we celebrated that we have won, because the loss and damage has been included in the agenda. What happened? Eventually, we knew, and as the civil society, we again cautioned our negotiators that don't celebrate yet, because that's a trap. That's a trick which is normally used by industrialized countries, by those who do not want to take action on climate change. Eventually, the decision has been pushed to 2024. This reminds me, because loss and damage is about my mother at the village who was waiting for the rain to come, but because of climate change, it has delayed. It is because of that woman in the DRC who is waiting for the rain, it is not coming because of the changing climate. It is about that pastoralist who has lost millions of livestock, waiting for somebody who caused this problem to compensate them on this loss and damage. So there is nothing which is going to happen. Leave alone even the facility we were asking for, but there are so many things which were carrying behind it, behind that. But the decision is going to wait until 2024. What does that mean? It tells you that you can die and be buried before we make that decision. That is simply what it means. The issue of adaptation, of course, brought us here also, and the adaptation goal. I'm very happy the chair of African group is here. And we had a meeting with him, we could see the frustrations in their faces. So we have to stand together. I don't want to talk about the finance because the goals have shifted. I call this, endless game of musical chairs. Every time they shift the goalpost, is unacceptable. So when we talk about the just transition, we want something which is defined within the African context. The just transition, the way it is defined in the North, in the United States, their labor movement, because they are grown, they have luxury of transition to new technology of renewables and losing jobs. As it's not only the jobs which you are losing, we are losing even the livelihoods. So I was asking one person, yes, you are talking about, and that is the problem with some of our people. And we need really to build their capacity within the Africa, not their capacity building designed from the North. Why? Because we hear somebody talking about the leapfrogging and all those, but he doesn't know that there is nothing to even transition from. So for us, it's about the livelihoods. So for us is, yes, we acknowledge that we have no option. Those who set the agenda for Africa, those who set the economic agenda, have resolved that there must be a transition to low carbon, climate resilient future. The future driven by renewables, driven by new technologies, and they have developed. So for us, there is no problem, and we have no option than we are going to move into that. But the African discourse on and just transition should be different on what we really mean by this. And for us, and the other stakeholders, is the stranded asset, discourse that, yes, we have oil, and this oil may not work in future. Yes, I think it makes sense that we have to move from because the age of oil is ended. We need really to fit ourselves into the future economic development models driven by renewables. That makes sense. And so when we are discussing, but let us not cut and paste the concept from the North and paste them in Africa. That is why even the policies which we have are very hard to implement, because we don't really reason with them, we don't converse with them, we just pick them and do very good documents, and they come and we are not able to implement. This being the implementation COP, we need to really look into those things and think about ourselves as Africa with our special circumstances and really put our hand up. It is not easy for our governments. It is not easy even at the same time to our civil society. We have to be told what to say, even at the civil society level. And we have said no. If you want us to engage, let's engage even. And that's the issue of procedural justice. You cannot implement a decision which you are not part of. So we need to be on the table, we need to be allowed, we need our voice there. Thank you very much. So as I finish, there are voices of people whom we have in the doing many things. During the African Group Day 1, we heard voices from thousands of our civil society guys and the youth who delivered their message to the chair of the African Union Commission. Yet we have another group from West Africa, which has been doing quite good work collecting messages of people. We as the civil society, we are very unified because we believe that we need to work together. They are here with even the kings. The people we also have kings. So I would welcome them here so that they can hand over the messages to the director of the African Union Commission. So, Sena. Yeah, so we have, I'm donating that minute of mine so that they can be able to come and present.
Est-ce que vous pouvez venir, s'il vous plaît? The king, please come. Moussa, venez. So thank you very much, Bitika. Thank you very much, Mr. Directors and friends. So we are the unified voice of civil society from Africa. My name is Sena Aluka. I come from Togo, and I work with Jeune Volontaire pour l'Environnement, and we organize a caravan. There were two big civil society mobilization ahead of the COP. The climate torch that our colleagues of PACJA brought across the whole Africa, and the caravan for climate justice that also went across 27 countries. And we are here with chiefs, Chief Goudi from Zinder in Niger. He's the he's the king from Zinder in Niger. He's the chief of all traditional chiefs of West Africa. And this is another chief, that's his deputy. So we are here to say we did a caravan, we collected a message from the ground, and the messages are clear. We are with you, we support African Union, and I will ask my colleague to just go and give to the directors the scarves that we did on that occasion.
Le slogan. À qui la terre?
À nous la terre.
À qui les eaux?
À nous les eaux.
À qui les semences?
À nous les semences.
On n'est pas
Fatigués.
On n'est pas
Fatigués.
Nous irons
Jusqu'au bout.
Touche pas
À ma terre.
Touche pas
À ma terre.
Ma terre
Ma vie.
Mon eau
Ma vie.
So solidarité avec les paysans du monde entier. Solidarité avec les paysans du monde entier. Je suis militant convergence. Je suis militant JVE. Je suis militante Oxfam. Si j'ai quitté mon pays pour Égypte, pas de soucis, c'est pour ma terre. Nous irons jusqu'au bout de notre caravane sans être fatigués. Nous irons jusqu'au bout de notre caravane sans être fatigués. À qui la terre?
À nous la terre.
Merci, chers camarades. Même dégâts, même combat, la lutte continue.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Those are the voices and the message of the kings and the people of West Africa. And you can see it is very beautiful for us in the way we do our things, our narratives as Africans. This is the voices we want to be heard, though they are suppressed here. So thank you very much for the team. And I wish to express our solidarity with the Voices for Africa, our solidarity with the people of Africa, and together we shall win. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and those were the messages from the CSOs. So in the interest of time, I guess the next speakers will have 2 minutes each for the interventions. We have Senator Didier Molisho, the chair of the Standing Committee on Agriculture, rural economy and environment of the Pan-African Parliament. He may challenge us with French, but we beg that he does it in English.
You want me to make in English? I speak French. I don't know if I can deliver my message in French or in English. Madame la ministre, Monsieur le directeur, distingués invités, mesdames et messieurs, le Parlement panafricain comme organe parlementaire de l'Union africaine a pour mandat de veiller à ce que le peuple d'Afrique et leur diaspora participent et bénéficient de manière significative des politiques et décisions de l'Union africaine. La participation du Parlement panafricain à cette COP africaine, COP de l'action, s'est fait sous le thème de renforcer la résilience climatique juste par l'action parlementaire. Les parlements panafricains pensent que l'action parlementaire doit être de plus en plus importante dans le processus des négociations sur le changement climatique. Au Parlement panafricain, nous travaillons avec PACJA pour intégrer le changement climatique dans les processus législatifs des pays africains, car cela reste le chaînon manquant de la formulation et de la mise en œuvre des politiques. Un cadre juridique qui transforme le politique en instrument juridique pour faciliter les actions au niveau national et infranational est essentiel à la mise en œuvre des contributions déterminées au niveau national de l'accord de Paris. Dans ce domaine, notre commission agriculture, ressources naturelles, environnement, a procédé à la création de l'initiative africaine sur la législation climatique, ACLI. Cette initiative conjointe de l'Alliance panafricaine pour la justice climatique, PACJA, du réseau panafricain des parlementaires sur le changement climatique et du Parlement panafricain a été créée avec une vision de mettre en œuvre d'actions climatiques qui s'appuient sur des cadres juridiques solides et de fournir une plateforme d'engagement des parlementaires afin de participer efficacement au processus de gouvernance climatique mondiale. L'un des projets de ACLI, c'est l'élaboration d'une loi type sur le changement climatique. Les comités travaillent également à l'élaboration de 2 lois types qui peuvent apporter une contribution significative à l'atténuation des impacts négatifs du changement climatique. Il s'agit de la loi type sur la sécurité alimentaire et nutritionnelle en Afrique et de la loi type sur la gestion des sols. La création du bureau du pape sur le changement climatique a pour objectif de fournir un appui technique aux États membres et de servir de centre de suivi, d'évaluation et de réseautage sur les activités, les questions liées au changement climatique au niveau national, régional, continental, et assurer la responsabilité de la planification, de la coordination et de la participation du pape à la session, aux différentes sessions de COP. Mesdames et messieurs, en vous énumérant ces actions, je tenais à montrer l'engagement du Parlement panafricain dans ce processus de lutte contre les changements climatiques et je tenais à souligner la forte collaboration que nous avons avec PACJA dans ce domaine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Our next speaker is the chair of the AGN, as he has to go, and then we'll have Auda Nepad.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. The representative of the Honorable Minister of Environment for Botswana, Mr. Motebe, the representative of the Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development and Blue Economy, Director Nyambe, honorable members of Parliament present, let me just say, ladies and gentlemen, well, I wish I came to give an update in terms of the status of negotiations based on my colleague Mitika on the assessment. But as you know, the negotiations are going on. We're concluding sometime today, and then the SBs will close. So it's very difficult to give a very intelligent assessment of where we are. But just to inform you that tomorrow we'll be having an African Ministerial Conference on environment briefing for our ministers, and that's where we are going to give an official position of what we think where we are in terms of the negotiations so far. But it's good to see our civil society colleagues pushing hard, because that's what we needed, having them in the corridors. Now, in terms of translating global policies to local action experiences from the continent, which is what we were requested to speak on, and we are grateful to interact with the African Union Commission and you invited guests. We think that in the African context, our implementation of climate change action is guided by our strategic documents that we have. You have the Agenda 2063, which does have reference in terms of how climate change is going to be addressed. We have aspirations, of course, there of ensuring that climate resilient development is pursued so that we achieve a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Now, you can only achieve that once you address climate change, which is why, like Director Nyambe indicated, the launch of the climate development and resilience strategy is very important in that context. But we also know that within our countries, we have our nationally determined contributions which have been developed to guide us in terms of our implementation of actions on the ground. And those are important instruments that we have to pursue. However, the only point to stress is that achieving low carbon development and particularly reaching the net zero level in terms of emissions for Africa is something that we'll have to put our minds to, and not be in a rush in terms of putting the time frames. And that's what brings me to the transitions discussion. In terms of transitions, in our case as the AGN, we emphasize that that just and fair transition, and deliberately we don't use one word, it is plural, transitions towards a green economy and achieving net zero emissions is not linear. It's not a direct line, because countries even within the continent are starting from different points. If you go to the global level, we are at different starting points, we have different structures of the economies, and therefore the transitions also have to be different. Countries have to depend on their national circumstances on how they move along that path of transitioning. But we also call them as transitions because it's not only transition in one sector. Even within the country, we shouldn't just focus on transition in the energy sector, for example. We have to transition in the agricultural sector. There are transitions in the transport sector, transitions in all sectors across if we are to achieve net zero emissions in the foreseeable future. But it is also important that we do factor in the aspirations of poverty reduction and meeting the development needs of our people. So it would not be fair to assume that Africa is going to transition at the same pace and within the same time frames with developed countries that have had the luxury of using the carbon space for quite some time, which has given them the development achievements that they have achieved over time. So transitions are not linear, as I indicated, because of these sectoral differences, but also the different levels at which we are beginning. So just transitions are directly related to our pathways towards low emissions and resilient climate development in the context of sustainable development and eradicating of poverty. At this conference, we are calling to recognize and agree on Africa's special needs and special circumstances. I know that my friend Mitika indicated that the battle for the Africa's special needs and special circumstances is lost. I wouldn't agree entirely that it is lost. There are several pathways that we use in the conference setting in terms of achieving objectives. An agenda is one, but there is another different line that you take. There are presidential consultations that are taking place under which issues will be reflected in the cover decisions, for example, that come out of the conference. But also what we are finishing now is simply the technical phase of the negotiations. We are going into the political phase where our ministers are stepping in, and we are saying tomorrow we are briefing them. It's not out of reach that we can get something, both on the Africa special needs and special circumstances, but also on the doubling of climate change adaptation finance, which were the two. Apart from the loss and damage, of course, loss and damage, we have discussions there. The other two were the other major issues that we have on the agenda. So not all hope is lost, and if we push together, both with the civil society, our ministers as they take over next week, and the consultations that are going on in terms of the cover decision, we should be able to salvage something before the end of the conference. Unfortunately, I wish to stop here because I do have to rush and I will not be able to attend to questions, Madam Moderator. There is a session that is going on right now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ephraim, for that. All hope is not lost. The next speaker is Dr. Esterine from Auda NEPAD. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, moderator. So I will use my 2 minutes, maybe even just 1 minute. Your Excellencies, ministers, honorable parliamentarians, distinguished participants, I am not going to make a formal statement. I'll put that aside because I have 2 minutes, one, but also because of what I have seen just now. After my very good friend and brother, Mitika, spoke, and the other members of PAJA came out, and we are proudly putting on this scarf and the wristband. I think it gives us hope that there is the momentum at the level in our member states on the ground to push for what Africa needs. Of course, we are talking about just transition, and just transition must mean decent life for all Africans. A decent life, of course, within a context of a climate resilient Africa. So I think that within the context of the negotiations, and of course, coming to Sharm el-Sheikh, this COP happening in Africa, there was obviously high expectations that it will deliver on what Africa requires. Now, Michika's statement, but also we just heard from the chair of the AGN, we might have some of what we want, we might not have everything that we want, but there is hope that together, as Africans, with this constituency that I see here today, we will continue to push for what is just for the continent. And what is just for the continent must be seen within the developmental needs of African member states. So we will not go into, because as they said, this will be discussed more by the time we leave here. We will know exactly where we stand on the issues of the special needs vehicle, where we stand on loss and damages, and on adaptation, and of course, on financing. But I think we can all very well say that the African Union, and that my colleague, Director Nyambe, represents, and myself, representing the African Union Development Agency, are with you. We are your organization, and we are ready to continue to support member states to this within the context of the negotiation, but more importantly, work with member states on the ground, with civil society on the ground, with parliamentarians on the ground, to drive strategic programs that will help Africa adapt to the effects of climate change, because we all know what is happening right now. We know about the droughts, about the floods, about the damages that is happening to the livelihoods of ordinary Africans, and that is what concerns us. Whatever we do is to be able to bring some solutions to what is happening on the ground in terms of how climate change is impacting on the lives of ordinary Africans. So my 2 minutes are up, but just to reassure you that as African Union Development Agency, together with the African Union Commission, we stand ready to work with all of you to ensure that there is a just transition, which means that the livelihoods of Africans are not jeopardized. The opportunities to create jobs for Africans are not jeopardized. But we will do what we can to ensure that our projects that would implement, support member states to implement their NDCs, but also to ensure there is that direct linkages between the NDCs and the national development plans, so we are not contradictory in the approach in terms of our developmental pathways. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Auda Nepad. Our next speaker, and before that, of course, the Senator, one of the key messages he raised was that there's a bureau in the Pan-African Parliament which was set aside specific for climate change. So I thought that was important to highlight since it was in French. Need to define our own just transition and not do a copy-paste, and that all hope is not lost. So before we give our next speaker the floor, which is Dr. Jean-Paul Adam, you have 1 minute.
Okay. Thank you very much, Leah, and good afternoon to all of our partners. I think so many points have been covered that I can hopefully remain within the 1 minute. And to say, first of all, that, of course, this is Africa's COP, an implementation COP, and we hope that, at least to a degree, it will be a finance COP, because we cannot deliver on implementation without the resources. We need the resources to be available, and I think the Africa Group of Negotiators have been very clear on how they are pressing for the resources promised to be mobilized as quickly as possible. But we're also looking at how we can get additional resources through financial innovations to help us meet those urgent costs, and that includes better leveraging the private sector, recognizing that Africa only has 14% of climate finance from the private sector currently, which is the lowest in the world. We need to achieve a just energy transition that leaves no one behind, and it has to be on Africa's terms, based on the resources that African countries have. And we need to build resilience in our economies by investing in agriculture, in the blue economy, and leveraging the opportunities of the African continental free trade area. And finally, yes, Africa does have special needs and circumstances, and it is important that the mechanisms that are put in place address those, both in terms of the COP process, the UNFCCC, but also all of the different institutions that are engaged in Africa whether it be the United Nations, the African Union Commission, the African Development Bank. We must be delivering to those special circumstances. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Shukran.
Thank you, UNECA. And before Botswana comes in, we are inviting our woman representative, Jacqueline, to just give us 3 minutes of a key message. Over to you, Honorable Jacqueline.
Thank you so much. All protocol observed. Jacqueline Amongin is my name, and I'm a legislator in the continent. First of all, I want to appreciate the presenters who have highlighted on the reasons why we came here, and aware that COP27 is an implementation COP. As the African continent, we came here with a clear message that we shall have Africa as a special, treated as a special region with special circumstances, which to a large extent we are losing already in the negotiations, although I think the AGN chair was being very diplomatic. I also see that loss and damage is something that we are almost losing as the continent. But what gives me hope tonight is that the African Union came up with a strategy which was adopted, and I believe that from the speeches that have been given by Estarine, Fantabong, and the rest of the presenters, Adam, there is still hope. And I think that we have to continue pushing for our agenda. For us as the parliamentarians in the continent, we will be interested in continuing to engage with all the different stakeholders here to ensure that the legislative gap, especially in regards to climate engagement, is not left behind in our modus operandi, in our day-to-day legislations at the different levels. Thank you very much for your kind listening.
Thank you, Honorable Jacqueline. And now we have the final statement of this session by the PS from Botswana.
Thank you, moderator. I'm here standing in for the Minister of Environment and Tourism. My name is Nchena Motebe. I'm the DPS responsible for energy. Allow me, moderator, to say all protocol observed as I issue the statement from the Minister. I'm pleased to deliver a statement for the 2022 Africa Day event as a co-convener of Part 2 of Africa Day side event. First and foremost, I would like to begin by thanking the government and people of Arab Republic of Egypt for the warm hospitality accorded to all delegates since our arrival here in this beautiful city of Sharm el-Sheikh. I would also like to congratulate Egypt on a successful first week of COP27. Africa Day has become a signature event at the climate change conference that we all look forward to attending. Africa Day provides us with a platform to deliberate on key priorities for our continent, take stock of and showcase achievements in the global fight against climate change, share experiences and challenges. This year's theme is both timely and relevant as Africa tries to position itself within the just transition narrative and spaces. I look forward to further engagement on the proposed cross-cutting thematic areas on green financing, energy transition, agriculture and food systems, green recovery, resilient infrastructure, circular economy, and peace and security. Key outcomes and recommendations will enrich the African position in the current climate negotiations. Africa's key priorities at this COP include the delivery of ambitious climate finance to support developing countries, an ambitious adaptation outcome, and in particular to implement the COP26 decision to double adaptation finance, progress on the provision of both technical and financial support to developing countries to address loss and damage associated with climate change, launch work on consideration of the special needs and special circumstances of Africa under the Paris Agreement in line with the relevant and previous decisions adopted by the COPs. Call upon developed countries to scale up their mitigation actions and provide necessary support to developing countries to contribute their fair shares, secure meaningful commitments and investments for programmatic renewable energy at scale, and support the social and equity dimensions of just transition pathways. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, I'm pleased to announce that Botswana proudly hosted the last validation workshop for the AU Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy and Action Plan 2022-2032. Following its adoption by the AU Assembly, we now call upon all relevant stakeholders to support its operations. Thank you. Your Excellencies, I feel proud that Africa remains a strong force in the climate negotiations. In this regard, and I would like to take this opportunity to commend the African group of negotiators under the leadership of Zambia for their dedication and commitment in ensuring that Africa's interests are considered at the expert level of climate negotiations and AMCN under the leadership of Senegal, for the strategic guidance provided to the AGN in the climate change negotiations. In order to maintain this unity of purpose, it remains important that AGN, AM, CN, and the AU Commission are in continuous dialogue and engagement. In my conclusion, I take this opportunity to thank you all for joining us to mark this year's Africa Day Part 2 event and look forward to a fruitful deliberations and successful COP27. I thank you.
So this brings us to the end of session 1. The next session is going to be moderated by Mr. Abu Gustave, who is the Director of Environment and Sustainable Development from Ivory Coast. So Mr. Abu Gustave, and I'm in the meantime going to call to the podium the other panels list for this session. So I'll give you the name for this one. Just say Issa.
This one?
It's a new name.
Before I start the moderation of this session, I just want to rephrase the sentence we received from the chief of Zender. Donc, je voudrais qu'on reprenne un peu le slogan à nous donné par le chef de Zender, solidarité avec les paysans du monde entier, solidarité avec les paysans du monde entier, à nous la paix, à nous la terre, à nous l'eau, à nous la terre, à nous les semences. Merci beaucoup, monsieur le chef. Solidarité, ça, entier. Merci beaucoup. Merci. So, I will call on the podium Mr. Ephraim Mouimpeya, Chair of African Group of Negotiators. Mr. Ephraim? Okay. So let me invite Mela Chiponda, African Women Development and Communication Network. Mrs. Mela Chiponda. She's not in the room. Mela Chiponda. And His Excellency Wavenya Indeti, Governor of Machakos County from Kenya. His Excellency Wavenya Indeti from Kenya, not in the room. Let's see if Mr. Islam Tuluan is in the room. Yeah, okay. Mr. Islam, please, for the podium. And also, let me call Mr. Ibrahima Chek Diong. Yeah, Africa Risk Capacity. You know the name? Who's it? You can. Oh, this is the last one, yeah. So only one. Okay. Okay. So thank you, Mr. Islam. So you are now going to tell about us. How can we translate global policy to the local action? Why Africa adopts or ratify lot of, lot of treaty or lot of protocol, but we have difficulty to implement it on the local level. So what is your solution in green recover and circular economy to help African people to be impact with the real regional policy? You have the floor.
Can I do it here? Thank you, moderator. Honorable ministers present, all protocol observed. I'm Elsam Turiahabwe. I work with the East African Community Secretariat in the energy sector. I'm happy to be here to talk about translating global policies to local actions, experience from the continent, and I have been asked to talk about energy and just transition And I will limit myself to the region that I know, the East African community. For your information, the East African community is composed of 7 countries: the Republic of Burundi, the Republic of Kenya, the Republic of Rwanda, the Republic of South Sudan, the United Republic of Tanzania, and the Republic of Uganda. Translating policies into actions, as it has already been pointed out, we are not at the same level. We are not starting from the same point. So that means that the path may not be the same, but in that regard, our region, the East African community, is endowed with untapped renewable energy resources, that is biomass, solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and in some areas, tidal waves. And then we have oil and gas, proven resources in Uganda, Kenya, and South Sudan regarding oil. We have gas in Tanzania, and then we have methane gas in Rwanda. We have existing frameworks, that is the frameworks that you tail in with the global policies, which frameworks also come from the national level of our countries. We have a regional power system master plan 2038. We are updating it to fit in with the agenda of the continent, the 2063. We have a regional strategy on scaling up access to modern energy services to facilitate the deployment of renewable energy. We have an IEC Energy Security Policy Framework 2018. We have a cross-border electrification policy to facilitate electrification across borders within the region. We have a climate change policy and plan, which also helps us in deployment of renewable energy, adaptation, and so forth. Our energy mix is almost 100% by our electricity production is majorly from renewable energy, the sources that I have mentioned above. And then when you look at our energy, anyway, needless to say, we don't have energy in an energy system to talk about, because you know that our energy system is not yet developed. So in terms of emissions, I think we don't emit, we emit very little, if any, from our energy system as a region. We still have challenges to go into actions because we have low access to modern energy services. We have low electricity consumption per capita. We have high energy poverty. We have been talking about poverty of economy, but it originates from the energy poverty. If you don't have energy, you cannot transform anything. We have our people still live below the poverty level. We also have high energy costs in the region. So what are our priorities now? We are looking at increasing access to modern energy services, providing sufficient, adequate, affordable, and sustainable energy, reduction of energy costs, and reduction of energy poverty. What is our policy direction? Our policy direction, we are looking at energy integration. By energy integration, that we are talking about a policy that allows the region to develop the existing resources in a sustainable manner. That is taking into concerns of the environment and so forth. So what are the actions in terms of policy? I'm not going into the actions on the ground of the projects that we do. But at the regional level, the Council of Ministers at EAC level established a Center of Excellence for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, IACRI, to accelerate deployment of renewable energy and energy technologies. That is action. Then two, enforcement of environmental laws. That is ensuring compliance to existing environmental laws. And then under this, in the energy sector, every project to be developed must undertake an environmental, socio-economic assessment, which is mandatory in order to make sure that we comply with the existing protocols and so forth of the environment. And then we are also promoting a policy of public-private partnership for the people. We don't see any development which does not take interest of the people. Instead of the 3PP, we have a fourth one, which is the people. So what do we require in order to make sure that these actions have got an impact? We require, of course, financial. We require technical expertise so that we can accelerate the actions on the ground. I think in the interest of time, I can't go into the actions on the ground in terms of what the countries are doing in the area of renewable energy and energy efficiency. So in summary or in conclusion, we are working on programs using the public-private partnership for the people. We have added a fourth P for the people so that we can be able to transform our societies. I think with that, that one should be, if I understand correctly, what just transition means. If it is right and fair, I think we are in a correct direction. Moderator, I thank you very much for your time, and I thank the audience for listening. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Islam. Big applause to Mr. From now, let's have some word from Mrs. Luchi Nyarenda from Africa Risk Capacity. Mrs. Lucy, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, moderator. Good afternoon, and all protocols observed. I'm here representing our Director General, Mr. Ibrahim Sheikh Jong, who was supposed to be here, but unfortunately, due to competing needs, he couldn't make it. Now, we've been asked to talk about solutions in the context of disaster risk financing, climate and disaster risk financing on the African continent, and this is what the African Risk Capacity, the organization that I represent, is currently doing. I think being at COP, it's not new for everyone that, you know, Africa, we are facing the brunt of climate change, and this conversation is really centered around that even though we are the least polluters, the least emitters, we are facing the biggest challenge when it comes to the continent, and it's not news to anyone when it comes to seeing what is happening across the continent. You talk of flooding in Nigeria, droughts in the Horn of Africa, tropical cyclones in Southern Africa. This is something that is happening more and more frequently going forward. And this is where disaster risk financing comes in as critical to really reduce the impact of these extreme weather events on the population who are more vulnerable to the effects of these natural disasters. Now, I think there is, earlier on when there were some speakers were mentioning that, you know, we cannot lose hope, and Africa is already doing something. And an example is the creation of the African Risk Capacity, which was done in 2012 as a specialized agency of the African Union to be able to work with member states to help them to prepare a plan and also respond to effects of climate change. These were lessons that were drawn from across the Caribbean, where they also had similar initiatives where governments were being supported to facilitate access to financing to help them responding. So really understanding Africa at that point was thinking, how can we also implement our own, learn from what others are doing, bring that to our own African context, and develop a system and a mechanism that should support African governments to reduce the impact of climate change on the vulnerable population. And this is how ARC was established in 2012. We were just celebrating 10 years of existence a few days ago at the Africa Pavilion, really just reflecting on our journey in the last 10 years, how we've worked with the African governments in this particular area. Now, just speaking about disaster risk financing, it's really about pre-arranging financing for disasters before the disaster itself happens. We all know that disasters are going to happen. The only thing we don't know is when and what the magnitude is going to be. So dealing with that uncertainty and putting in place plans as well as financing in advance of that event happening, this is what disaster and climate risk financing and disaster risk financing is all about. And this is the work that African Risk Capacity does. And we work with governments to, first of all, do the risk modeling, to understand what the real risk exposure is, also work on preparedness. How are you going to work and respond in a situation where you've been affected by an extreme weather event? But also, how do you then identify financing? What instruments do you have as a government in your toolkit that you can use to implement this response? Having these beautiful plans or early warning systems in place without financing for an event that happens, it will not be effective. So really, we are providing the solution from the technical to all of the way to the financing aspect, so that governments should be able to access financing. This is beneficial in a number of ways. To start with, the work that goes into the pre-arrangement of this financing mechanism enables the governments really to create the understanding of the level of risk exposure, the vulnerabilities, the systems that are existing in terms of their ability to respond should an event happen, but also what else can we do in terms of identifying additional instruments that can provide our financing to respond. At the heart of everything is to protect the lives and the livelihoods of the people that would be affected by these extreme weather events that are induced by climate change, which is what we are talking about here at COP27. And the second component of why pre-arranging financing is important is that it provides the governments with ability to access financing that is outside of the national budget. And this financing comes in as an additional at the time when it is needed. When an event happens, and for us, for government to start looking for financing at that particular time, it's always challenging. And also we've seen that depending only on humanitarian response is not always as efficient as it could be, because there are also systems and it takes too long for us to be able to mobilize that resources. By having this predictable element for the government to know that should an event happen, they will be able to access additional funding that they can use to implement response to affected communities, it helps the government to plan in advance and know that they're not going to reallocate resources from development programs to implementing response. Rather, they will be focusing on development and knowing that they've got additional resources that will come in when events happen. Now, at African Risk Capacity, we've been working with 35 member states at the moment who are signatories to the ACT Treaty. And over the last 10 years, we have been working to develop capacity in risk modeling, in contingency planning, as well as in risk transfer as one of the instruments that can be used to provide access to financing through our financial affiliate called African Risk Capacity Insurance Company, which provides parametric insurance to governments at the sovereign level to allow them to access this financing. To date, we have provided payouts to governments in over approximately $124 million. And I can give examples. Recently in Malawi, Malawi received $14 million as a result of a drought from the 2021-22 agriculture season. When Cyclone Batlai hit Madagascar earlier in the year, around March, African Risk Capacity paid up to $10 million to the government of Madagascar to help them to provide resources to the government to enable them to facilitate this early response so that they can save the lives of the people that were affected by these cyclones. We started with drought and tropical cyclone. We are also now including flooding as one of the instruments that we'll be working with the governments, but also outbreaks and epidemics, and understanding also the need for governments to be better prepared when it comes to disease and outbreaks and epidemics in responding to affected communities. I wanted to say a couple of points as I conclude. Number one is the importance of disaster risk financing. As I mentioned, by pre-arranging the financing, we are thinking about risk in a more proactive way. We are not sitting and waiting for the disaster to happen and then we start thinking about what we're going to do about it. But we are already thinking about what can we do in advance of these events happening, because we know that they are going to happen at some point. So this is the importance of us being more prepared. And I think there was a slogan around solidarity. African Risk Capacity was established on the theme of solidarity, working together as an African continent to pool our resources together, to mobilize our resources and see how we can collaborate in being able to channel resources where they are needed every time one of our member states is being affected. The second point I wanted to raise is really about being consistent about the political will that our heads of state had expressed in 2012 to establish ARC, and being able to sustain this political commitment to ensure that solutions that we create as Africa are being advanced and promoted and are being scaled up to ensure that we are responding within the context of what our needs are. And this is the importance of working together. We cannot do it alone as individual countries, but rather we need to come together in the spirit of solidarity and see how we can promote these initiatives that we're developing as a continent as solutions to our challenges. The final point I wanted to make is around resilience. I think it is key and it is quite important and critical for us to focus as well on building resilience in our communities. Currently, most of our communities have got very low resilience. As a result, a minor shock requires the government to have a huge response implementation because these communities and the households are not able to withstand the shocks on their own. The reason being that their resilience is quite low. And we need to make sure that we are focusing on that as well, building resilience so that these communities and these households are able to withstand the shocks that would come in that are minor, and that government can only come in when the shocks are major as to provide the support that is needed. So I think resilience building is quite critical as we speak about disaster risk financing, climate risk financing, and dealing with climate change on the African continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lucy. Now let's give a chance to Mr. Philippe Ozano to give some few words. We have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, moderator. My name is Philip Osano. I work for the Stockholm Environment Institute. I'm really happy to be invited to share some thoughts. I just wanted to talk about an area which is very important when it comes to dealing with climate change, particularly when it affects cities in Africa, but also farmlands and livestock production systems. These are two things. One is how we deal with waste, waste management, and second is actually also how we build upon opportunities to generate energy from bio-based resources. We have been working with East Africa community to develop the first East African bioeconomy strategy. This is the second strategy in the world, regional strategy. The first one was developed by the EU, European Union. And this bioeconomy strategy has 4 pillars to it. The first pillar is looking at food security and sustainable agriculture. So in the area of food security and sustainable agriculture, they're looking at investments around value additions to crops, livestock, and also microbial products. Looking also at opportunities around novel food products, and lastly also looking at bio-based agricultural products. Now this is important because we know that about 40 to 45% of agricultural produce in Africa is actually wasted in the post-harvest level. So investing in better management at post-harvest processing, storage, and so on becomes very important. The second area where bioeconomy is becoming central is actually in the area of health and human well-being, and opportunities around this center, for example, on bio-based pharmaceutical resources, traditional medicine, which is a neglected area, but very important, particularly in African rural areas, and of course, cosmetics and well-being products, which is becoming so much in demand because of the health and well-being that people are investing in. And the third area is looking at opportunities for bio-based industrial development, looking at biodegradable packaging. You can see that many countries are now banning single-use plastics. In fact, under the United Nations Environment Assembly resolution is asking for a new treaty on plastic, ban of plastic, but we have opportunities to then invest in bio-based, biodegradable packaging and alternative to plastic resources. And already there's quite a lot that's going on in terms of research. Also looking at bio-based textile and renewable bio-based oils, which is also becoming in demand. And lastly, moderator, is in the area of energy. And energy, a lot of African people in the rural areas are using biomass, charcoal, particularly for cooking and lighting, but there's opportunity for biomass briquettes and pellets to replace, of course, charcoal, and of course, converting organic waste into biogas energy, and also opportunities for developing advanced fuel. So I just wanted to say this because there are two important things I want to make, two important points. One is that we do three major things around bioeconomy. I've talked about working with the East Africa community to develop the strategy. The second thing is that we have an annual bioeconomy conference. We've had two, one in 2020 and the second one in 2021. And next year we'll have one which will be the first African bioeconomy conference. And the third thing is actually generating evidence, which is the research around bioeconomy. And last month we just published the first status report for bioeconomy in East Africa. And in the next year, coming year, we'll be looking at developing the status of bioeconomy report for the whole of Africa region, so that other regions, West Africa, Central Africa, Northern Africa, can also be able to know what is the status of bioeconomy and opportunities that can be invested to not just deal with other things I've talked about, but also as part of climate adaptation response. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. Thank you. A big clap to Philippe. Before closing this session, I want to invite Madame Jacqueline for the closing remark.
Thank you so much, our presenters, for giving us practices and experiences from your countries. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the previous presenters who gave us key messages in regards to our engagement and why we are here in Egypt for almost 2 weeks. I appreciate the fact that we've all been able to be very attentive during this engagement, which has been organized by the African Union. And I'm sure as different partners coming from the different angles, civil society, parliaments, development partners, we have a big role to play after we leave this COP27. That's when COP27 will have a meaning. With those few remarks, I would like to therefore declare this session officially closed. Merci beaucoup, asante sana.
Lucy. How are you?
This is just an announcement. We will be communicating to you. We'll be launching the Parliamentarians Climate Action Network, and we will be sending you invitations before we break off from the COP. Thank you so much.